Thank you for listening to this episode.
And follow the podcast on social media by finding at Prestigious Pod. And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Bean, at Chris Bean Official, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousinitiative@gmail.com.
Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website.
This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean. Today I'm thrilled to have a special guest, Stephanie Moon, with us. Stephanie is a book marketing expert who has worked with New York Times bestsellers and has an extensive experience in crafting a creative brand around marketing campaigns for authors. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Stephanie, why would somebody want to listen to our conversation today?
Well, one little known fact is 81% of Americans want to write a book and they think they have a book in them, a story. They want to talk about their business, and writing a book is so much work. But the other part of publishing is really marketing your book. And that's where so many authors, I think fail is too strong of a word, but where they kind of fumble a little bit because they don't understand that marketing is also a super kind of long part of the publishing process.
So, why do you think those authors neglect the marketing piece? Is there something they maybe didn't know ahead of time, and what does that look like for them?
So I could talk for hours about this. So authors think if they're going the traditional route, which is where I have a lot of experience in, they think that if they have a publisher, a big one, even a medium one, that publisher will do all their marketing. And that's just basically not true. I worked at many publishers, including big ones, and they are working so hard, but who they're trying to reach is different than who the author is trying to reach. So a publisher's marketing department is trying to reach booksellers. They're more like B2B marketing. They're trying to reach, your local bookstore, your Target, your Amazon. That's who they're marketing to, kind of. And they do some direct to consumer marketing, but that's where the author should be doing the most work. That's where the author has that audience, right? And that's where the author needs to concentrate on tapping into.
Okay, so then with that, as somebody who perhaps wants to write a book or has already written a book and is trying to get it published, why then go the traditional route and do a traditional publishing company as opposed to do self-publishing?
That is also a good question. So self-publishing has really kind of the level of kind of professionalism that you can create your own self-publishing has really, increased. I am impressed by so many people that self-publish, but self-publishing is also if you do it, you're the boss, which is great. You get to decide the cover, you get to decide the price, you get to decide the timing, but also you have to decide that. And at a publishing house, every one of those things is decided by a person whose main job is that. So if you're going with a traditional publisher, the person designing your book cover and designing your interior layouts, that's all they do. They're a designer for books, and probably books specifically in your category. So business books, cookbooks, children's books, right? And so I think a lot of people don't understand how much time and expertise goes into creating a cover, creating a layout, because most people have not art directed anybody or don't know how to say oh, this cover is I don't like this cover because this, and I want it to be more like this for whatever reason. It's hard to articulate a lot of times that specificity to get the cover to where it is, right? And so think about that in every kind of stage of publishing, right? So there's design, there's production, there's sales, there's marketing, there's also operations. Just because you've created a book, how are you going to sell it, right? Where is it going to live? Do you really want it in your garage? And every time someone orders it, you have to print out a mailing label, go out there, get it, put it in a box or a Jiffy pack, bring it to the post office, right? That does not feel like, I think that's one, a lot of work. And two, you have to become like an expert at a lot of different functions.
And so, really, when you do the self-publishing route, it is kind of akin to building a house, and you have to design all the small little details and say yes, and have all these decisions you have to make. That if you just hire a designer, they go through that and do that for you. That's what it's like to go through an actual publishing company.
I mean, yeah, kind of. Like the publishing house, you're not hiring, right? They're actually
They're hiring
paying
you.
you,
Yeah.
right? So that's also like a huge difference. I think when people think about self publishing, they're like, oh, I can just do this. But then they're surprised by the cost of hiring these professionals, right?
Mm.
You hire an editor, a graphic designer, um, the printer, marketing, all of that, that adds up, right? And you're fronting that money because you're in charge, right? But if you go through a traditional house, there I would say the bigger ones, I mean, all of them would be paying you an advance. The size of the advance, varies, but they're paying you,
Mm.
right? That's covered. That's part of the deal.
Now, when these authors are going out and they're trying to publish themselves as an author, but also the book that they wrote or the collection of books that they wrote, what are some common mistakes that you've observed these people doing?
So I think one, covers. I think that there are so many non-appealing covers. And unfortunately, people do judge a book by its cover a lot of times, right? Especially when you're buying a book online, on Amazon, on Bookshop, right? You only see the cover. So there's that. And two, people think that publishing their book and then putting it on a place like Amazon is enough marketing. And that is absolutely not true. There's like I think 4 million books published a year. So the biggest question that I like talk about with authors is how are you differentiating yourself from every other author, every other book, right? How are people going to find your book in like a sea of Amazon listings, a sea of Barnes and Noble listings, right? And that really comes by marketing. And people fail to do that. And I think what happens a lot of times is self-publishing, like these are the traps for self-publishing. One, they don't think it's so expensive, but then they spend this money, a lot of money, and then by the time they're ready to like market their book, they're so burnt out and tired, they're like, forget it. And then for me as a marketer, I'm like, you just spent 10, 20, $30,000, depending on what type of book, and you don't want to market your book. You basically spent all that money for nothing, because if you're not marketing, nobody is, and nobody is going to find your book. So you basically sunk, however much you spent, and you're not going to get it back.
Yeah. Okay, so what does an effective book marketing strategy look like?
Yeah, good question. So it's really about the most successful authors are ones who have already built a community and a following, right? They're known as an expert in whatever field or topic or industry that they're writing in. So, for instance, like if you're, I worked with an educator recently, and she is an expert in educating about early literacy, right? She speaks at conferences. She has a lot of people following her on LinkedIn. She has, a small following on Instagram. She writes articles. Different publishers know her as an expert, right? And so that's how she can sell her book. She can like tap all these people and say like, hey, I wrote this book about this topic that I'm an expert in. And they already kind of recognize her as an expert because they knew her before her book was coming out. So it's kind of like having that name and that visibility. And so kind of depending on what type of book you're writing, it can look really different for a lot of people, right? For a lot of different genres. But it's that kind of knowing that being a successful author is also being visible, right? And a lot of times, a lot of authors have trouble being visible. They're like, oh, I'm a writer, I'm an introvert. And I'm like, okay, but if you want your book to sell, right, that the book that you've worked so hard on to get out there, you need to tell people about it. And like when I worked in traditional publishing, so many authors would be like, maybe a month after their book came out, they'd be like, Stephanie, like, how's my book selling? Or how come it's not selling more? They're like, is it bad? And I'm like, no, your book is wonderful. And I was like, but people don't know that you wrote a book.
Hmm.
You need to tell them. You need to tell them again and again and again because people need to be reminded and people need that repetitive reminder that you wrote a book before they will do something about it
Okay,
and buy
so
it.
let's say we have somebody who's writing a book. It's done. It is ready for publishing, ready for people to, ready for it to fly off the shelves. How far ahead of time does the marketing start before the consumer can actually get the book in their hand?
So to me, marketing is very holistic. You, I tell authors that like the minute you decide to write a book or that you want to write a book, you need to start marketing it because marketing is not just the author holding up this book. Hi, this is my new book, right? It's more like it's that marketing funnel. It's like people need to know who you are. They have to like learn to like and trust you and then buy your book, right? Because you're also competing against so many other things for their attention. You need to become an expert in their eyes. They need to want to spend their time and also their money consuming your content and your expertise, right? And like right now, there's so many things that consume people's time. There's the news, there's social media, there's their own life, there's their own work, there's their families, right? So you're basically competing against all of these external things that you have no control over. But what you do have control over is like how often, well, not how often, but you do have control over what you're putting out there. And so you need to basically be out there. You need to be consistently out there so they remember you.
Okay, so what does it look like for somebody to establish themselves as an expert in the field amongst the competition that is already out there?
Yeah, it's really finding your niche. It's really like deciding. And so this is like a question that I also get a lot. There are people, authors are of all different genres asking, what's the best social media, channel that I can be on? And I say, it really depends on you. Where can you show up the most, right? Because so much about marketing is about consistency. So if you don't like short form video, don't get on TikTok because otherwise you won't be able to create content there. Um, if you don't like to write, longer form stuff, don't probably get on LinkedIn because LinkedIn is mostly like longer posts or articles. It's finding where you feel most comfortable and where you want to spend your time because it's about, I would say in almost all cases, you can find part of your audience in these different on these different channels. It's more about where do you feel comfortable so you can be there.
And a lot of times, the people who are writing the books are writing the books for like either people like them or previous versions of themselves. Excuse me.
Yes.
So that if they are marketing then in those avenues, in those areas that they would then go to, then they're going to connect with the people that are likely going to connect with their book.
Exactly. Exactly.
So then, with today's digital age, what type of role does online presence play in the success of marketing the book, and what type of social media strategies what does that look like for an author to be on social media always promoting what they have?
Yeah, so I think that for authors, it's not always just promoting your book. It's promoting yourself as well. Because I mean, in my opinion, most authors are not trying to make a living as being an author. They're using it for something else, right? So if you're writing a business book, it's kind of like your introduction um, an introduction to you and your frameworks and your thinking for these other customers, right? If you're a cookbook author, your cookbook is more an introduction to you, your recipes, and then you're using it kind of like a stepping stone because, publishing, if you go with the traditional house, like, yes, there are people who get huge deals, multi six-figure, seven-figure deals, right? But these are people that have spent years, like years and years and years building their following and then showing how they're so engaged. But I would say for more of like the average author, it's a tool in your toolbox to get to the next level. So for maybe it's you're using the book as like a way to create more visibility because with a book you have more opportunities to pitch yourself for media, podcast, broadcast, right? Maybe you're using it as an intro to working with you as like a high-end consultant or service provider. There's a lot of different ways to kind of use the book, but I would say very few authors use a book as like a solid um, income stream.
Hmm.
In the nonfiction area. I think if you're writing fiction, that's maybe a little different, but it's that you're using it to kind of level up your branding and marketing.
And okay, so you mentioned podcasts.
Mhm.
With in because I know a little bit, of course, a little bit about podcasting in that area. What is the intention for somebody coming on as a guest for a podcast, and how do they have have a conversation while not saying, "Hey, I wrote this book. Hey, I wrote this book. Buy this book. Buy this book. Buy this book. Hey, this is me. Buy this book." That the whole time.
That's a great question. So okay, so podcasts are so good for people writing basically nonfiction books because people who listen, I mean, these are stats that on studies that I didn't do, but that I kind of quote. People who listen to podcasts are more likely to buy books of people they hear on podcasts. And also the way there's something about when people listen to audio through like a headphones or like a headset that kind of affects their brain differently than if you're just like watching TV. Somehow it feels closer, or they like absorb the information in a different way. So there's that. And what the author is doing is like introducing themselves, right? So they're just telling people about themselves. And I think, like, also good authors have figured out ways to talk about their book without talking about it. So it's maybe like sharing the origin of their business that then led to their book, or sharing stories that are inside their book and then saying like, oh yeah, so I put more detail in my book. It's figuring out ways to kind of make the person that's listening to the podcast know you and be like intrigued enough to follow you on social media, maybe check out your book. um yeah,
Well, and
that's kind of.
it's interesting you say that too, because podcasting, from my sense, is interesting on the listener's perspective. Because if you listen to like, let's say you listen to a specific podcast for a long length of time, you have a weird kind of relationship with that person. It's all one-sided and it's only just through audio, and they're not even talking to you directly, but you've heard this person speak for so long, and then you go and meet them and you feel like they're an old friend that you, and of course the host, whoever is doing the show, has no idea who you are. It's a weird relationship, but there's a connection that's made on the listener's half because they kind of go through this journey with you and they get to connect with you on different points.
Mhm.
And because they listen to you for so long, it's like you've created a friend that you just
Yeah.
listen to as opposed to interact with, kind of. So that is interesting. And then of course that's the host side, but then the author would come in, they get to share whatever they have with those people that have made a weird friendship with with the show. And then
Mhm.
hopefully that resonates with them, and then they go out and try to buy the book. And if that author is on the show probably, the host of the show probably has some sort of like understanding or agreement, like, hey, I like this author, and I like what they have to offer. We have a connection there, and then the listeners, of course, like, oh, hey, this guy likes it, or the host likes this, so I like this too, so I'm gonna do this, and there's that continuation of that really kind of interesting connection that podcasting is.
You bring up such a good point, right? So the also being on a podcast is like having in a direct referral, right?
Mm,
Because it's over 50% of all purchases are made or are affected by a personal referral, right? And
mm,
that's like, just think about the last book you read. How did you find it, right? Did you find it from a friend? Did you hear it on a podcast? Did you, where did you find that? And so also being on a podcast is like as if you're the listener, it's as if that host is like personally recommending this person's book because,
mhm,
just like you said, like you trust this person because you've been listening to them for 2 years. And the host trusts this guest to be
mm,
on. So it's like a personal referral
right.
for the book.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, with the author, they're trying to engage readers. They're trying to get them to understand, have some sort of common ground, so they can, get that book into the listeners or to the readers' hands. What are some
Right.
ways that the author can create a loyal community around them so that they have those people that are ready to buy the book if and when they make another one, or for that one that they already have?
I think a lot of it is about creating value, right? It's a lot of it is giving people what they want. So, excuse me. So like the most kind of like obvious example is if you're, for instance, writing a cookbook, right? Most cookbook authors who have big deals, they have spent years writing on a blog, writing a Substack, having a newsletter, their Instagram. And you know what? Like all the content on those channels are recipes, how to make dinner easier, what to do when you're entertaining, whatever that food related stuff is. But they have been basically providing value for so long before they've written the book.
Mm,
And I would definitely say writing a cookbook is probably 5 times or 10 times more intense than writing like a regular business book because you have to write the recipe, test the recipe yourself,
mm,
test it with other people, do a photo shoot, style the photo shoot, edit the photos. There's so much almost like more in a cookbook. And so basically, the very successful cookbook authors, they've been doing all of that work tirelessly before. And so they've built a community of people who kind of value the same things as they do, right? Maybe it's making vegan Chinese food. Maybe it's making dinner with 5 ingredients. Maybe it's gluten free desserts, whatever it is, they have built this community of people who just love what they do and love their content and then also love how they present the content and
mm.
how they, get it out into the world. And so those are the people that are buying your cookbook because those cookbook authors have spent so much time and energy, um, creating that value and doing that work before their book comes out.
Okay, so that is an interesting point then. As the author, if they're writing on all of these other areas, how much of the book then has to be like brand new, and how much of it can be repurposed content that they already have that they're just organizing into the book? Because if you're, a specialist in whatever the field is, lots of the times the things that
Yeah.
you're writing, the blog articles or whatever, are going to overlap with whatever the book is going to be about.
So that is such a good question. So I think that every publisher is probably different. I would say 70-ish% has to be new. But I also think, for instance, even though you've written, like, let's say you've written a blog for 10 years, right? Every week you publish a long form article about some very, a question or a topic, right? And that's amazing. And you can definitely pull from that. But also, as you're working with your editor and your publisher, I think a lot of that will evolve and change, right? Because think about yourself, right? Like this podcast, going back to when you first started, even though you might love those episodes and love those guests. Probably the caliber and the way just produce the podcast is so different from before, right?
Mhm.
And so it would be the same with that author. What they produced, even though the information is very good or similar, it won't be the same just caliber as they are when they're writing the book, right? So, um, yeah, there is some old stuff used, but I think just like as you're working through it and as you're becoming like better at presenting the material, you would write it in a different way.
Right. And I guess then for authors who perhaps are attributing to writing a book, they perhaps should keep that in mind so they don't give too much of the golden nuggets away for free, so to say, on their blog or whatever, and keep a little bit in reserve for the book.
Yes, but I also think, that's like a question that authors have a lot. They're like, "Oh, am I giving too much away?" In as they're talking about promotion and thinking about content and thinking about like lead magnets, articles, whatever. And part of me as a marketer is like, if somebody I mean, you should definitely not give the whole book away. But also, if you have a fan that is has the energy and is willing to and sees every single piece of content that you write, whether it's on your blog, you're quoted in a media article, you're guest blogging, you're on a podcast, whatever. If they can piece all of that together, like good for them. You have a super fan. They will still probably like buy your book. So I think that it's so hard to actually get every single like thing from a book to compile together for like an outside like reader. You might know, oh, I talk about like 30% of my book in some way, shape, or form, but it's hard for somebody to
Hmm.
gather all of that basically.
And really, the process of writing the book is a little bit of providing new information, but also a little bit of housing all of the information that you have all in one place with a relatively definitive through process from start to finish so that other people can
Exactly.
take it and get something from it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Now, hey everyone, it's Chris Bean here from the Prestigious Initiative. If you're looking to level up your life and unlock your full potential, I've got some exciting news for you. My recent guest, Joel Gandara, has an incredible program called 31 Days to Become a Better Man. Joel has packed years of life-changing insights into this easy-to-read book, guaranteed to help you rethink your shortcomings and redefine what it means to be a man in today's world. But that's not all. Joel also offers powerful one-on-one sessions and group classes to guide you on your journey. And he has a special offer for the Prestigious Initiative listeners. You can get $19.99 off the program when you use code PRESTIGIOUS at checkout. Don't wait. Take your first steps towards becoming the best version of yourself today. Visit 31dailychallenges.com and use the code PRESTIGIOUS for your discount. And now back to the show. All right, so I'm thinking about book marketing. I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson. He is on a book tour now with his new book. Obviously, quote unquote normal authors probably aren't going to be able to do something like that. But is there something similar to that kind of thing where they do a book tour where they get up and they do speaking engagements on their book in a public type forum as opposed to just on a podcast or over social media?
Mhm. Absolutely. But that's like, so I think book tours are so interesting because I think as the way media basically portrays being an author and going on book tour is like one that it's um, really normal and you're going to go on a huge like nationwide book tour if you're an author. And that's like just basically not true, right? Because the logistics behind a book tour are so much. You have to like work with bookstores and venues to secure the event. You have to get people there. You have to promote it. You have to have books there. You have to get the author there. It's just so much work. And for, I don't know if you've seen kind of authors online basically say, even famous ones, be like, oh, like I did a book event, a book signing, a book talk somewhere, and like two people showed up. It is so hard to get people to commit to doing something, right? And so that's why also a lot of people have ticketed events, because you're basically pre-buying a ticket, just like a
Mhm,
concert. You
mhm.
buy a ticket and it covers the cost of the book, plus usually ticketed events are at like bigger places, so the cost of the venue, right? Because it's like a form of entertainment. And it just is so much work to do that, right? And only authors who have a built-in base of people to promote these events to, that's like basically the only way it really makes sense to do like a nationwide tour. I think you have to have a lot of people in your community for them to want to like see you in different places along the West Coast, Midwest, East Coast. That's um that's just a lot of people. And I think that events are really great for authors to speak at, right? So let's say you're writing a book about like diabetes, how you can handle that. Then if you find events where people who care about diabetes, doctors, nurses, patients, etc., that makes sense to do that event, right? But I think that the nationwide, like multi-leg book tour where you're staying in fancy hotels and there's like huge audiences are just, I think you know, that's what you see in the movies. And I think very few authors can kind of garner that many people and so many locations.
Well, and that speaks on the community that they have behind them. And until you have
Exactly.
a community behind you, let alone a rather large community behind you, nobody's going to be driving multiple hours or anything like that just to hopefully see you for a handful of minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, some authors have like done that so well. They have built that community, but again, it's over years. I think that the biggest kind of like takeaway for authors, if you're wanting to write a book, is start building the community now. Like, even if you're just starting to write an outline, right? And your community can like change and grow and evolve as you do. But like, to me, what I also tell clients is that building your community is like takes just as long as writing your book. So if
Mm.
your book takes 5 years to write, so you can spend that 5 years also growing your community, because you need those people to be like rallying around you. You need them to support you, be pre-ordering your book, coming to any events.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about your master your marketing program. What what motivated you to start that program, and what impact have you seen that has on authors?
Yeah. So my programs are really, when I first started consulting, I basically worked with any author. And as I found out, it was not like a right fit, because I think that there's kind of like these mindset shifts that authors really have to have. And the ones that like I work best with are the ones that kind of like know marketing is so important to their like the success of their book. And then also they're willing to do the work,
Mm.
right? Because there's so like my philosophy is basically I want to teach you how to market your book. I want to teach you how you can do this continually, because if you want to write more than one book, you're going to have to be doing this all the time, right?
Mhm.
It's not like a one and done. Marketing is definitely more like weekly meal planning versus like planning a wedding.
Mm.
It's not just boom, one big event for your launch day, right? The day your book is out. It's like, oh, every single week, figure out, okay, what are we going to eat? What's in the freezer? What can I use up? How much time will I have? And as you get, as you do it more and more, you get better and better. And of course, there are weeks that just kind of suck. You don't have time, you got sick, your dog, whatever, right? And that's okay. But then as long as the next week, you pick back up and do it again. And so the authors that I like have the most success with kind of like get that, right? They get that, okay, so this is a process, just like writing the book. It's about learning how to be visible. And for so many authors, that's like one of the hardest things that they have to like get used to. I just had a call the other day with an author, and she's, has a very good book deal, right? And she's a debut author, very good book deal. And she's just like, but Stephanie, why does anybody want to hear what I have to say? I was like, well, because what you have to say is what makes you different than every single author out there. She's like, but, I spend hours thinking about what to post, and I don't post anything because I think nothing is like good enough. Nothing is like will resonate, right? And we spent a long time talking about just like don't overthink it, especially if your community is small, because then is anybody really seeing it, right? And it's like also too, like you have to, like, I understand also you want to be private, right? Like don't share the outside of your house, don't share your car, whatever. But also you have to give people an opportunity to like get to know you. Who are you besides an author? How are you different, right? And like those other things about you and about your life um, are what kind of help readers resonate with you, because there's basically authors are like a dime a dozen, especially with self-publishing, right? Any genre, everybody wants to write a children's book. Everybody who has a business thinks that their business is like groundbreaking. Fine. But the people that really stand out are the ones who have just created these readers and followers and community that resonate with them so much, right? And so that idea of being visible is just so hard. And yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about that. So that's one thing also. If you want to be an author, just get used to being a little bit more visible.
Well, and I'm sure that's kind of a tough part because people, and I'm generalizing, and I shouldn't do that, but I'm going to do it because I think it works in this kind of setting. The people who write books are probably not the people who are going to be all-time public speaking professionals. They're the people who write the books about something like that. They think that they're, for lack of a better phrasing, kind of hiding behind the keyboard and doing their behind the scenes type of work. But in order to
Mhm.
sell those books, you have to get out in front of people. Otherwise, they don't know who you are. Your book could be amazing, but if they don't know who you are,
Yep,
they don't know you from anybody else. And
exactly.
I can relate to how it feels to post things on a continual type of basis for a year. For a year, I made every single day I made a video and posted it every single day. 1 year, didn't miss a day, even Christmas and New Year's Eve and the whole deal.
Love it.
And a lot of times I got people asking me, "Man, don't you feel weird about?" No, listen, I sit down, I have a question that I'm answering, and 98% of the time it's the first take, unless I like, well, no, that was just wrong, and I do it again. But I just put it out there, and the challenge for me is, and people probably don't know this a whole bunch, I'm actually an introverted type of person. I am not an extrovert person nearly at all. And so doing even the podcast is kind of outside my comfort zone, but doing something like that was kind of outside my comfort zone as well. But I wanted to do that as a challenge. So if you're listening to this, if you're an author who is kind of struggling with that, just do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like your book, you can strive to make that perfect because you have an editor and the whole thing. But the daily kind of things, as you're trying to market yourself, it's okay to be flawed in those things. It's okay for it to not be 100% correct or get, 18 million likes and shares and follow. It's okay, right? You just have to go through the steps of doing it over and over again. And in order to do that, you have to accept the fact that from time to time, they're not going to be perfect. They're not going to be the best steps. But as long as you continue taking steps forward, that's better than staying still or not moving at all or moving backwards.
Exactly. And I also want to like ask you, so what did you see at the end of the year? Did you see like what kind of like were your lessons learned?
My lessons learned were I need to think less about how I think about myself. right? Like, so in the beginning, it was lots of like, oh man, I got to do this again because no, by the end, it was not a seasoned professional because I did it for a year, but it was like, okay, listen, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do this thing. I got the process down, click, record. All right, great, done, post, bye. And in the process of doing that, what I learned is not to be so hard on myself, right? And oftentimes, and we all know this, but oftentimes those images that we see from other people on social media, they've been filtered 8 times. It's like the 15th shot they take, or oh man, that's such a good tweet. That was amazing. Well, actually, they wrote it like 85 times and had to edit. Listen, those aren't the prime perfect examples of themselves. They are the perfect examples of themselves that they want to portray to people. But if you want people to know who you are, like really, you have to be able to cut back all of those extra layers and actually present yourself as you are to the people. And if they like you, great, good. And the people who don't like you probably weren't going to like you anyways. But the people who do like you for you, not the image that you're trying to, the box that you're trying to fit yourself into.
I love that because it's basically, I did a less rigorous like kind of test of that, right? Basically, for a long time I was like posting reels at like almost every day just about different publishing stuff, and a lot of times they would, get a few likes, maybe some comments, whatever. But then so that was on the account, right? But then behind the scenes, as I was talking to people, as I was meeting with potential clients, as I was whatever, people would say to me like, "Oh, Stephanie, I love your content." And I'm like, what? And it took me a long time to realize like, oh, people are seeing it, but they just are not
Mm.
doing anything, right? Because I would then, after I would hear that in a call, I would like go back later and look like this person who I follow, who I also just talked to, said that they love my content. I just would like just check a few, posts, and they never liked anything. They
Mm-hmm.
never commented. They never like did anything. But I'm like, oh, okay. So people are seeing it. And I think that's also part of like what's also really hard is that, as a creator, I'm sure even you and I both, when we create something, we would love if somebody liked it, right?
Mm.
But also people are seeing it. People are noticing, right? And part of like what I teach is that it's about that consistency, right? It's about that commitment because there are basically like silent watchers, right? They're just watching. But the more they see you, like the more you'll be at the front of their like brain, the
Mm.
front of their mind, right? The more they'll remember you. And so it's kind of like this is all happening like invisible, like in the back, but you just have to like keep believing, I think, in yourself to just like keep doing it, right? Like, and soon you will see like different signs of that. And for, I've had can think of so many examples for myself, but also so many examples of this happening for authors, Um, so just keep believing. It sounds so cheesy, but it's really true.
And do your best to not place your self-worth in that view count or like count or share count or whatever it is. Don't those things are meaningless. They're just there to try to pull you in, but don't let those metrics tell you who you are or how you're doing on the path.
Exactly. And that's why they're called vanity metrics,
Mm.
um it's just vanity,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean anything, right? But I can
Surface level.
also see how, I still work with some publishers and they're like, okay, but how is, one of their questions is like, well, how is us, having social media really affecting our ROI? And I was like, well, that's, it's really hard to measure because, you know, you being out there and interacting with people, posting about your books as the publisher, it might be hard to see these likes and how this translates. But what you're really building is like, oh, when people want a book about a business or self-help, they know they can like kind of like look at your um channel or page or whatever to see like what's coming up, right? You can be known as an authority or an expert in the topic. And so also it's like, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So it's kind of like it takes a long time for people to understand that, right? It's not like, again, one amazing post or for a publisher, one amazing book that really puts you on the map. It's like a lot of consistent work to get there.
Yes. So with authors, how can authors benefit from a collaboration or a partnership, both in terms of kind of publishing their book, but also in the marketing of the book as well?
Yeah. I love partnerships. That's like one of the I think best ways to kind of build your credibility. So, in the same way that we talked about earlier, being on a podcast, it's kind of the same as with a partnership. So, if you're partnering with another creator or another brand or another company, that company's audience has already built a relationship with them. And by you partnering with them, you're basically referred by them, right? I
Mm,
use that term pretty loosely, but it's like, let's say you're a business book writer and you are partnering with like an accounting firm, right? That means that that accounting firm is basically vouching for you because they're partnering with you in some way, right? Maybe it's some content on their blog or newsletter. Maybe it's a social post. Maybe it's doing um, an event for business owners together. Whatever it is, it's like they are saying, we are happy to associate our name and our company with this person. So there you go. And in like marketing speak, it's basically like you're borrowing somebody else's audience, right?
mm,
And that's one of the easiest ways um for you to grow your audience because you basically have somebody vouching for you
mm.
already.
Right. Now, how has the publishing industry evolved in the recent years, particularly in terms of marketing, especially with things like AI being in the mix with all of this? What does that look like now?
I think AI can be so helpful. I think if used in the right way, but I definitely think also I am not in favor of AI created books. I just think they're not. I don't think the technology is there yet. But what AI can do for authors is really help make marketing your book easier. It can help give you ideas. It can help give you, a little boost when you need it. Like, oh, you wrote something, but it just doesn't sound like yourself. You can use AI to help it, help make it sound better. But like marketing for a book has really changed over, the last 5 to 10 years. And that's because publishers, even huge ones, I mean, unless you're someone like Michelle Obama or something, who gets a multi-million-dollar deal and has full marketing support, budget, and personnel behind you, they're really looking for you to market your book. Because also a publisher publishes into so many different categories, right? Like they publish, fiction, self-help, business, cookbooks, children's books, right? So even though their following might be enormous, you don't know why each person following them is following them. Maybe they
Mm,
like kids' books. Maybe they like self-help books. Maybe they, whatever. You don't know, right? But on the flip side, you as an author, you know why people are following you because
right.
they like what you have to say about this specific topic or area, which your book is about, right? And so publishers are really looking to you to sell your book because they're already taking a gamble on you. Because with a traditional publisher,
Mm,
they're giving you money up front to write this book. And so okay, so the behind the scenes on that is okay. So you want to write a book. This publisher, I mean, is like, okay, we want to sell your book. They give you an advance, right? And the advance is, I mean, it's broken up into different like payments, but they are paying you to write the book, right? And you, I would say, in most cases, don't have to pay for anything else. I think in some cases, if you're doing books heavy on illustration or photography, they sometimes work some of that advance money in to like cover that. But if you're writing a book that's mostly text, like you just write the book. You are now paid to do that. But um the publisher has paid you and you haven't even done anything yet, right? And they are still paying their designers, their production, their warehouse, their marketing, right? And so they've basically, by paying you, have taken a gamble on you. And um, the only way the author and then the publisher is making more money is if the book earns out, basically makes back all that money um, that you've been paid in advance.
So then my interpretation of how that works is wrong then. I thought as an author, I write the book, I market it to the publishing house, to which they say yes, no, maybe, and then go forth from there. But most of the time it works as I have an idea for a book, I sell that to a publisher, and they say yes or no, write this book, don't write this book, and go from there.
Yes, because I would say, fiction is different, but most nonfiction books are not completely written by the time you're selling it to the publisher. Because part of the publisher's role, excuse me, and the editor's role there is to edit the book, right? Because the editor knows the market. So, like, let's say you're writing a self-help book, right? Like that editor for your area knows the market and knows like, oh, okay, so like this topic in general is really good, but let's emphasize these three things from their book proposal or from their story or from their business, because we've seen that that really helps. We saw that this other book published by somebody else, like this is a comp and this did really well because of like these three things. Let's try to replicate two of those things in our book, right? Those are all things that are really like somebody being an expert, right, in the area, somebody knowing like, oh, okay, this is like what helps sell books. This is like this book did really good. Let's figure out, let's like backwards engineer why it did that, right? And so that's like an example of one of those like expertise things that you're getting by working with the publisher, because they have people that this is their job, right? They know the self-help market. They know covers like this, these are like the cover trends. Um, this is how we can kind of push the boundary on it without being too different, right? Whereas if you were self-publishing, like you could absolutely do that, but it would take you a long time because you would have to figure out, gosh, what are the best comps to this book? How do I even know it's a comp? Oh, I have to read it. Okay, how am I going to figure out how many books, how many copies did this one sell? What did they do behind that? What did you know, whatever. And that's stuff that, editors are doing daily, right? They're watching, okay, so this house put out this book. This book did really well. Oh, I've been seeing this book everywhere. Let me like look at it. So there's a lot of like work and background and context that's happening behind the scenes. I think that sometimes if an author is like self-publishing, that it's hard to get that experience, right? It's hard to get that like institutional knowledge, basically.
So then, if somebody has a book that's already done and they want to pitch that to a traditional publishing house, because seemingly that doesn't happen very often, what does that look like?
You definitely can. And I've definitely seen that happen. And I think depending on the book and the publisher and the editor, maybe you'll make a little bit of changes, maybe you'll make a lot of changes. I think it just really depends, right? Um, yeah, it depends.
Okay. So, all
Depends on
right,
the vision.
as we're talking about the marketing game for publishing books and how that's changed in recent years, what are some trends that you think could be happening or are likely to happen in the future in the marketing field?
Ooh, I like that. So one that's like happening for sure right now is people are blowing up on Substack. I don't know if that's like a newer, if people feel like that's newer, but it definitely affects books. Um, Substack is one of like the quote unquote hottest kind of channels for like an author to be on. And but I would also say like caution that Substack is like a newsletter, right? Substack is like a place for long form content. It can feel so sexy and fun to like start one, but you also have to commit to being on there,
Mm.
commit to writing posts, posting on there, even when you have 200 subscribers, right? You have to keep doing it, right? I also think that that's a big one. And I think building your community first. Like, I think people who do that just have so much more success. I don't think that's a trend, but more like that's how you can, um, you know, be more likely to be more successful in being an author, And I think trends are trends for a reason. And I think every book is kind of different, right? Like every book will be marketed a little bit different depending on the author. But I will say also this, what makes authors really also successful is knowing what your community wants.
Mm.
So for instance, like if you know that your community loves um dinners and a book talk, right? And dinners and a book talk are like much smaller than kind of like a bigger venue kind of like theater style thing, right? But if you know that people want that, give that to them, right? Because people, even if they can't go to the dinner that has 50 people, they'll still buy your book. It's like knowing what will really like resonate with your audience, um that can help you be a better promoter.
All right. So it's interesting you say Substack. This podcast is housed on Substack, and that's been 2 years now. I can tell you, Substack has been doing quite a few kind of creative things behind the scenes that helps them to kind of take the charge for creative people. Even I use it in the podcasting kind of side of things, but a lot of changes that they've made throughout there have made publishing a podcast on Substack so much easier, so much more efficient than it was 2 years ago when I got on Substack and trying to do this. So it is nice to hear that Substack is kind of hopefully the right place to be, and seeing kind of the effects of things that they're doing behind the scenes has certainly been helpful. And I'll piggyback on what you're saying is I think that is a really great place for creatives to be in that kind of realm.
And I am so happy to hear that. I think Substack has they have made it easier for people to connect,
Mm.
right? For you to also recommend
Mm-hmm.
other things, right? And again, that's like an example of a referral.
Mm.
Because if you recommend, like, let's say on your Substack, you recommend another podcast, people will be like, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I would take a listen. I've been listening to this podcast for 2 years. I I think that like that recommendation will resonate with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's it's that idea of like to me building your community is basically like building a pool of people that will recommend you,
Mm. Yes. Yeah. What a cool way to think about that too. So,
right?
Stephanie, as we're getting ready to wrap up here, what advice would you like to leave aspiring authors with who are just starting their publishing journey? What advice can you give them as they're starting that opportunity for them?
Yeah, definitely build a community because also writing can be so isolating. You're writing at your laptop or your computer and you're like revising. And I think like also part of your community is also other writers and also people who are that community is just there to help uplift you, right? And also people like remember that people want to help you. So there's this also thing where I feel like a lot of authors are like, oh, but will people want to do this? And whenever somebody asks me that, I go, well, do you want to help other authors? And they're like, of course, I'm happy to share their book, write a review, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, exactly.
Mm.
People love to help other people, and sometimes they just need to be like explicitly asked or told like this would be helpful.
Yes.
It would be helpful if you shared this with your family and friends on social media. It would be helpful if you left a review, bought this book, pre-ordered my book, came to my event, whatever it is, right? Sometimes people just need that very explicit, clear next step because people love to help people. I think that's also like one thing to remember. People want to help you, and especially people that are in your community, because as easy as it is to like follow or like or subscribe to somebody's newsletter, it's like just as easy to like unsubscribe, right? It's just one click, right? One unfollow button. So I think like keep that in mind as you're going through this journey.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. I want to say thank you for sharing your insights, your expertise with us today. And if the listeners wanted to get in contact with you or to learn more about you, where would be the best places for them to do that?
Yeah, so I am a lot on Instagram, and my handle is Steph Moon Co. My website is also stephmoonco.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, but yeah, Instagram and private website are the best places.
Very good. And I'll be sure to leave the links to those in the show notes. And listeners, if you found today's episode as valuable or helpful as I did, you can share it with somebody who you think it would resonate with. And until next time, keep striving to be better.